temperature on impeachment talk actually keeps rising, and it's unclear whether if the fever is ever going to break. In an attempt to circle the wagons and stem the seemingly growing tide of Democrats calling for President Trump's impeachment, Speaker Nancy Pelosi held an emergency closed-door meeting today with her caucus. There she goes. According to Politico, the meeting was called to try to calm the mood inside the caucus. Her message, well, multiple sources in the room told NBC News, was to stay the course and have a little faith. Giving her backup were the chairs of the various committees investigating the president and his administration. They gave updates on their various investigations. And while Speaker Pelosi was comfortably accusing the president of engaging in a cover-up, as we said, she was more cautious on how to punish him. Let's watch.
In order to have an investigation of any kind, if you want to call it impeachment or whatever, you have to have the subpoena. You have to go to court. You have to develop your case. It's not personal. It's about patriotism, and that the facts will take us where we need to go.
I mean, everybody's into gestures these days. The most animated political life I've ever seen. According to an NBC News count, by the way, of the 235 House Democrats, 31 have either called one way or another to get the impeachment ball rolling. 31 out of the 200 plus. Only one Republican, of course, has called for President Trump's behavior to become acted on. That's Justin Amash of Michigan. From where I'm joined by Zerlina Maxwell, Senior Director of Progressive Programming for SiriusXM, and George F. Will, the syndicated columnist. Zerlina, is it possible that nothing is really happening going towards impeachment? That the Speaker's exercising steam control. She's trying to keep the steam down, under control. But all this is a holding action. She wants to get through the summer because by the fall we'll be all focused on who's going to win the Iowa caucuses, and there'll be other focuses for the Democrats to get excited about. I get the feeling she's never, ever, I was pushing her former AA, she's never, because she thinks it's bad news. What do you think?
Look, I think that, there's a little bit of the delay tactics on both sides here, Chris. I think that you see Donald Trump obviously delaying and saying no to every subpoena, every document request. And on the other side, you have Nancy Pelosi trying to keep the Democratic caucus together in a moment where the question about impeachment is an uncertain one. And I think that as the leader of the Democratic majority that she just got, she's playing it cautious. And, there is some criticism about her approach. Well, I think she's playing it cautious because she doesn't want to lose the majority she just got. And I think that
so
certainly.
It's politics.
Yes, it's politics. But, to that same point, Republicans are also playing politics, Chris. They're elected to the government as well by American voters, and they are making a political calculation in the same way I think Democrats are being accused of. Now, on the question of impeachment, I think an inquiry should be opened. Ask me 6 months ago, I would have said it's not worth it. Just vote him out in 2020. But I think that he has done a lot since the report itself has been released to obstruct the investigation. And I think that the question is a serious one that the House needs to consider to start an inquiry, which means they're asking the question whether or not there is enough evidence in the conduct and behavior of this president that would warrant an impeachment. That's all step one is. It is a process. And so I believe that they should start that process. And perhaps Nancy Pelosi is going to be the last person to agree to that process when there's more people in her caucus supporting that.
George, we know what a real impeachment exercise looks like. It's primetime hearings, a primetime vote on the articles, with everybody watching in the country. It's very somber. Do you think the Democrats will ever engage in it?
I don't. I think Nancy Pelosi, who's been around here for a while and remembers 1998 to a lot of Democrats who weren't here then, most Democrats weren't here then, and it's as distant as the Peloponnesian War. She remembers that in 1998, the country looked at the Republicans trying to impeach Bill Clinton, said this is disproportionate, and in the 1998 elections, in the middle of a second term, an incumbent president increased his representation in the House. Never happens. Republicans made it happen.
But didn't the mark on him bring down Gore? Probably. I think Gore paid for the sins of Bill Clinton in 2000.
I think that's right. I think that one of the themes that George W. Bush used effectively was restore honor to the White House.
This way. He said, when I take the oath, I'll promise to restore. Yep. Do you think that you agree with that, Zerlina, that no matter what else is said, nobody wants to be impeached?
No, I don't think that Trump wants to be impeached. I think that he wants to be able to say the Democrats are sore losers, and that's why they're going down this path of impeachment. But I think as serious American voters, if you're watching tonight and you think that the president has engaged in misconduct that warrants the Democrats and the Republicans, frankly, because they're also elected, like I said, to seriously investigate whether or not the president has committed acts that are impeachable, then you should call your representative and tell them that. Because I think that the way this shifts is the public needs to make their feelings on this question heard loudly and clearly. And it can't just be we wait for a poll that, where a majority of Americans support impeachment. We have to get them on the record now. So call your congresspeople and let them know what you think about this.
Well, let's talk about the politics, because Nancy Pelosi, as the leader has laid out, and I agree completely, has made a political call. It may cost her majority in the House. But I would wonder if that's true, George. Do you think that's true? Do you think people are going to vote against somebody because they were for impeachment?
No, I think the country's not particularly interested in this. Remember, this.
You don't think it wouldn't affect the vote at all?
No, this is basically, as the country hears it, it's a process question. I know that the refusal to comply with House subpoenas was an item in the Nixon impeachment, but it wasn't what the country thought Watergate was about. It was about a burglary, it was a crime, it was a cover-up of that. I think what amazes me, Chris, is how much time Democrats are spending talking about things they know are not going to happen. We're not going to abolish the Electoral College because 13 small states at least will stop it. We're not going to abolish private health insurance because 180 million Americans will stop that. And we're not going to remove this president from office because the Senate will stop that. Why are they wasting this time? And I think that will dawn on people that there's a large element of theater and gesture in this.
Okay, I want to get back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.